I will be giving you a summary of this form, but prior to doing so, I want to give you a little bit of history. There are federal laws regarding this service and or support animal. There are Hawaii state laws, and just a little bit of background. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act said that a service animal is now qualified as well as a public accommodation. Then the Department of Justice clarified the definition of a service animal in 2011, March of 2011, and they said that a properly trained dog or a miniature horse constitutes a service animal. Then in 2013, HUD presented guidelines for assistance animals. But in 2017, the Federal Fair Housing Law, or the Federal Fair Housing Act, said that there was a lack of clarification as to what constitutes a comfort animal. So in 2017, they had a law that addressed the comfort animals in residential situations. On January 28th of 2020, HUD issued new guidelines, and that is called the Assistance Animal Notice, and this replaces the prior HUD guidelines from 2013. This new guidance provides a recommended process for landlords to follow when faced with an animal-related accommodation request. So the Hawaii state laws, the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, they established their own guidance based on the federal laws. So we bring that up in our addendum. And on July 10th, 2018, a new law was established for civil penalties for fraudulently representing a dog as a service animal. And just so you know, currently in our legislative session of 2021, there is a bill making its way to become a law, which will further clarify misrepresenting an animal as an assistance animal. And should this become a new law, then we will then revisit this form to identify it if it needs to be revised. So let's look at our service and or support animal addendum. So you can imagine there is volumes of paper involved with both the service and or the support animal. And we have my subcommittee, which constitutes principal brokers and broker in charge, who are mainly working with property management. So we all together sat down and studied these volumes and came up with this one form. And we tried to make it complete, but it is 2 pages. We couldn't leave it for 1 page. So we felt that this needed to be said at the top, that it is part of the rental agreement. Generally, that's when you would use it. And we also felt it was important to establish that this animal is approved for this particular tenant. So under the Fair Housing Act, we state there are 2 types of assistance animals: service animals and or support animals. So we felt it was important to have a definition of both. So the first part is about the service animal. And just so you know, if the disability is apparent, no documentation is required. However, the service animal is, because it is defined as a dog or a small horse, it must be trained to do work or perform a task for the benefit of the individual with a disability. And this might include other types of disabilities. We wrote some of them down. The work or the task performed by a service animal must be directly related to the individual's disability. You may ask 2 questions. 1, is this a service animal? If they say yes, then you can say, what task does this animal perform for your disability? If the individual identifies at least one action the animal is trained to perform, which is helpful to the individual, the animal is then considered a service animal and the landlord will not make any further inquiries. The support animal. A support animal is one that may not be trained, but it does provide assistance and/or therapeutic emotional support for individuals with a disability. And we go on to mention the common kept household animals like cats or dogs or small birds, and we continue from there. Okay, so now we have a box, and the box is to help the landlord when they go to do an inspection, so they can identify the service animal or the support animal, the breed, the age, the weight, the color, and generally there's not going to be more than 2, so we limited our box to just 2. We felt it was important to discuss a reasonable accommodation. A reasonable accommodation is a change, an exception, or an adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service that may be necessary for a person with a disability so that they can have equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. Now, if the tenant has a disability or a disability-related need for an accommodation that is not obvious or otherwise known, the tenant or the tenant's friend or companion may request a reasonable accommodation, and it can be oral. It does not have to be written. They're requesting for an assistance animal, and the landlord may require reliable documentation at that point. The landlord is not entitled to know what the disability is or the diagnosis, and supporting documents are often presented by a licensed healthcare professional, and we go on to describe what or who those types of people will be. And if the tenant submits proper documentation to support the reasonable accommodation, the landlord must allow the animal. Civil penalties and fines are bolded because we want the tenant to know that if they do misrepresent either a service or a support animal, that there could be fines and penalties. Now, this is important. A tenant cannot be charged a higher security deposit. A tenant cannot be charged a security deposit for this animal. They cannot be charged a higher monthly rent, and they cannot be required to get liability insurance. However, when they turn the unit back to the landlord, it must be in the condition that it was in prior to them renting it, of course, minus normal wear and tear. So the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission allows for reasonable restrictions for an assistance animal. So those are listed there, and I'm not going to read them, but I do want to draw your attention to number 8. And that says that the animal must be under the control of the tenant. However, normally it's with a harness or a leash or a tether or even a cage. However, if their disability does not allow them to hold a leash or hold a cage, then they can use voice command or signal command so that they can keep the animal in control. So the next page is any special terms that you might want to list, but I caution you to be very careful with what you put down there. And then, of course, everyone signs.